after him writing this letter, again, like I said, he went through tears and just this very difficult, like, dredging up of trauma that he had kept suppressed for so long. And by bringing this out and recognizing it, not trying to run away from it, he's starting the process of healing.
Welcome to Reforged, a podcast by the Authentic Masculinity Project, a place where we have raw conversation about modern masculinity, capacity, complexity, integration, and authenticity.
Every man carries a story about his father. Whether he was present, absent, harsh, soft, or silent, he left a mark. And for better or worse, that mark becomes a map, one we often follow unconsciously. Welcome to Reforged, a podcast by the Authentic Masculinity Project. I'm your host, Scott Austin Martin, licensed counselor, somatic processing trauma therapist, and men's relationship coach, and guide for those that are ready to forge what's actually true, authentic. Today, we're diving into one of the deepest rivers I feel a man can explore, his relationship with his father. Whether you're trying to heal, forgive, understand, or reconnect, this episode will speak to the part of you that still remembers being a boy and still longs to become a man worth respecting, which I think is true for all of us men. Joining me is a man who's done this work himself and now walks beside others, relationship coach and men's mentor, Matthew Laskowski. Good morning, Matthew. Welcome.
Good morning, Scott.
I just briefly before we get started, today's episode may stir things. It might challenge old beliefs for people or bring up stuff that you thought was buried, I thought was buried, or they thought was. That's okay. Just remember, healing doesn't come from understanding everything. It comes from staying present. So if some of what we say lands hard or strange, stay curious. Your body will know what's true. So if I could let's just get into it, Matthew. What's one moment between you and your father, good or painful, that still lives in your body today?
Great question. And wow, there's so many, but let me do one. And if we have time, I'll do the second one. The first one happened when I was probably about maybe 11. And my parents they separated when I was 11. They got their official divorce when I was 12. I played on a travel baseball team. And we were actually good. I wasn't, I was an average player, but the team was really good. And so we traveled a lot. And I remember when, the separation was happening, there was a tournament in Toronto, Canada. And my dad took me and my other siblings. So I have an older sister, younger brother, younger sister, and all of us went. And I remember after the tournament, he sat me down. He's like, "Listen, son, because of the changes that are happening, I'm not going to be able to take you on these baseball tournaments because it's not fair for your brothers and sisters. They don't really want to be here, and I feel like I'm having to drag them." And so in that moment, it was this painful moment of feeling like my dad was leaving me, and everything was set up for me to travel with the other coaches and stuff. And I remember we had to do a trip from Solon, Ohio, where we won the regionals, all the way to Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I drove in the back of with my buddy's dad, and, had a great time. This was a year later, but there was a moment there when he looked at me and I felt like I was losing my dad. And that stayed with me for a very long time until I kind of got a little bit older. And I realized like he was sacrificing, because he loved watching me play baseball. And he was sacrificing that so he could spend more time with the other kids and their interests. So that was a big one. If I just want to do another one as well, because
Sure.
It kind of comes full circle. I finished university. I didn't realize why I was going to university other than my parents telling me since I was 4 that I was so smart and that I was definitely headed to university. After my 3rd year, I went to study abroad, and I ended up staying a year in Thailand, and I wanted to just stay there. But my loyalty to my dad and him telling me that I was going to get a university degree made me go back home, right? I went back home, I finished the other 12 credits, and I told the university to send the degree to my dad. It wasn't for me. I didn't care about it anymore. Just send it to my dad.
That's awesome.
And I told my dad I was going back to Thailand, and he didn't understand. Like
Mm.
he didn't get it because he's never traveled. And he's like, but your family's here, your friends are here, your whole life is here. And I said, listen, I need to start this new adventure to realize who I am and to step into that, right? And my dad was struggling financially at this time, really struggling financially. And he offered, without even really supporting my decision, he offered to take me out to the shopping mall and buy me working clothes in Thailand. And he spent a couple $100 in structure, I believe it was, buying working clothes in Thailand, the money he didn't have. And we got to spend that afternoon together, just him and I. And it was something that still lives on in me today. So those are the two things that really come up for me when you ask that question.
Right, and those are, I mean, both of them to me, they seem really, really beautiful. Like the first one, was this, wow, I really want my dad there, and he wasn't able to be present for me in this situation. But then you kind of like, it speaks to your maturity now that you're able to explain the why behind that. It begs the question, why do we seek, even years later maybe, our father's approval for so much, and how that has an effect on you, me, so many men that we work with as well. But that second one, which was, that was a beautiful dad story, just like dad sacrificed for you. Like there's a lot of men that are listening that didn't have that kind of parenting. So I wonder if that has, contributed to your coaching, in a lot of ways, where there's a big part of this where we're learning how to refather ourselves, or, creating a space for men to be refathered.
For sure. Yeah, it was an amazing. Both of them were amazing experience in hindsight. Obviously, there was a lot of pain in the first one, but having gone through the work, I realized that this was also a very important time. And I don't know if he meant it this way, but a very important time for me to get instruction from other men. My dad got custody of all four of us. And during that time, my dad was a man, like a manly man. We would wrestle around in the living room and stuff like that. And me and my brother would jump on him. And he was, he was the masculine 1950s man. And while I don't think he realized this, by kind of letting me continue to travel with baseball with other dads, and there were moms too, but with other dads, he allowed me to be, I don't want to use initiated, but he allowed me to be mentored by other men who were not my dad. And I think that this is an important thing that I'm dealing with right now because my son's 11, and so he's going through puberty and things like that. And I wonder, what can I do to allow other men to help mentor him? Because I think we get to a certain age as boys where we're kind of going through that puberty thing where we don't listen to our dad anymore, right? We need someone else to kind of guide us or kind of mentor us. And we don't have that system in place anymore like we used to, hundreds and thousands of years ago. And so by my dad choosing this very difficult decision to explain this to me, I think he did me right by allowing me to access to the knowledge and wisdom of other men in the group.
So I'm sure you come across this in your coaching. What do you say to men, quite honestly, like myself, who had more traumatic childhoods? Dad wasn't present. Dad was critical. There's some, variety there where there wasn't that initiation, right? I mean, that seems to be the core of what our work actually is showing men that there is a container. So, how would you speak to that need that's so overarching in society today?
For sure. Great question. And we talk about this often in our men's groups as well as the one-on-one coaching. What I did early in my first in-person men's group was we did a dad introduction. So what you do is we went around the circle and everybody introduced their dad as if their dad was sitting right next to us. However, with this said, you introduce the good and the bad, right? And so what this did is this set up the next homework or the next project, which was to write your dad a letter, right? And there's many men in my group who their dads have passed, and so they've transitioned. And so this was a very powerful exercise. And so what they did, again, we went around, we did like a 3 to 5 minute introduction of our dad, who he was, where he came from, and things like that. And then, having opened that space, everyone went home and they wrote a letter to their dad. Now, this took months for people to finish, right? And what I realized is that the reason it took so long, and I use this with all of my all of my clients as well in coaching, the reason it takes so long is because to get that first word down is really hard. You don't know where to start, but as soon as you start, then it just kind of goes, right? And so I encourage everyone to start to write a letter to their dad, knowing that you're probably never going to send it to him, but that you want to kind of get all of those feelings and all of that, like you said, traumatic experiences out in the open. Some of the guys in my group, they actually burned it after they wrote it. Some of the guys sent it to their dad, and some of the guys actually took it to their dad and read it to them.
That's beautiful. And in parts work, we call that a fire letter. So I'm curious if you've done this with clients, which I have also. I'd love to hear, like, I'm assuming some have shared with you, or maybe your own particular fire letter that you maybe wrote at one point or another. Like, what have you seen that address, and how? And you said some throw it in the fire. I've seen guys put it in a bottle and throw it in the ocean without any identified marks on it and watch it, kind of float away for a long time was another way. What have you seen that address? Because that seems like kind of classic parts work, which is one of my favorite methods for integration.
So what it seems like happens is it brings up, I guess it dredges up, maybe is the word, some of these emotions that we've suppressed about our dads, right? So I think they come really well together, because with the introduction, you'll see like people are proud of their dads. Most people say the really good things about their dads and they're really proud of them. And so that's a beautiful part to have too, because we have to have gratitude within this whole process. And so we wouldn't be here, literally would not be here, if it wasn't for our dad, right? He's the one who created him and our mom created our lives. So you see with the introduction is you see this kind of gratitude and this kind of, I'm proud of my dad. He's a good man. And people really focus on the good things about him. And then in the letter that's much more private, people dredge up some of these, like you were saying, traumatic experiences. And they really start to connect some dots about where they are currently and what might have caused that in terms of their relationships with their dads. Most of the guys in my men's group are fathers. Many of the guys I coach are actually fathers as well. And so what I've seen is that by doing this letter, men have told me that they're actually becoming better fathers just by recognizing where their fathers came up short.
So what do you say to the man that's like, man, my dad, I've been disconnected from him forever. He wasn't present, or even worse, he beat the crap out of me, or to hear this, write a letter to my dad, man. Why would I want to dredge that stuff up? What would you say to this particular client?
It's part of the work, right? It's part of the inner work. The work that we're talking about, Scott, and the work that we do is not easy. And this is not an easy task for many men. I mean, again, let me clarify that these two stories that I told you were good, came out to be good stories, right? But I had a very difficult relationship with my dad because he had to move from his masculine into the masculine feminine to be both mom and dad in the house. Also struggling financially. Also, he quit drinking, right? Which totally changed his personality. And so my dad and I fought a lot because I'm the oldest male. We fought so much that there was one point when I was 16 that he couldn't use physical intimidation anymore. I was like, no. Like, I don't care about your man strength. And, he backed down, and that was the end of that. Right. But we had a very tumultuous relationship from the separation and divorce from my mom to me moving out, right, to go to university. And so within that, for me, it was very important to uncover certain things that my dad was trying to show me that maybe he didn't have the skill to do, right? My dad definitely hit me, growing up. This was kind of the way we grew up is, our parents kind of, were part of the 60s, generation where they used, physical force, spanking, the belt, whatever it was. And so I think, the difficulty of this pays off when you're able to open up and cry. And when you're able to, because what happens is when you're able to open up and cry, you can start to say to yourself, he was doing the best he could with what he had. And that is when you can start to forgive. There's a guy in my group who said, I'm not ready to forgive my dad. I'll never forgive my dad. His dad also was, very successful, and they had this beautiful family. He has 6 brothers and 6 siblings. So there's 7 in total. And all of a sudden, his dad just started smoking crack and went on a very, very downward spiral. From there, infidelity, from there, divorce, and just disappeared from the lives of his kids. And so he wasn't ready to forgive his dad. And it was very hard for him to write this letter. After him writing this letter, again, like I said, he went through tears and just this very difficult, dredging up of trauma that he had kept suppressed for so long. And by bringing this out and recognizing it, not trying to run away from it, he's starting the process of healing, right? Because our fathers do, and we do with our kids, we injure and we traumatize our kids with the stuff that we haven't healed. And so it has to stop at some point. Otherwise you keep the cycle, the generational trauma going. And so this letter that he actually finally wrote, he said it was one of the most beautiful experiences of his life. And he says he's still not ready to forgive his dad, but he does understand a little bit more why his dad did what he did. And he does feel like in time he will forgive him.
So I just want to draw attention to that, just even in this podcast right here, that there seems to be this pattern with so many of us men where, and I call it the hood over the engine, where we start one place and it's like, I don't know if we have to be able to open the hood to look at the engine. And even in this podcast, the very first part of you talking about your dad, I'm like, man, that sounds like a cool dad. I want a dad like that, And then you went down to another layer and you expressed, yeah, my dad hit me and, I bucked up and it was a bit of a different story. And this is what we find with men, that there's layers to this stuff. And then you went into the conversation about your, a coaching client, and there is this healthy movement or flow that we appear to be looking for, to where anything that we don't discuss is never addressed. And we can apply that to relationships, but boy, to apply that to the relationship we have with ourselves. And you tied that immediately into kind of what I call the trauma train, which is, I always use the example of Holocaust survivors. The research on that, we now know that children of Holocaust survivors are prone to PTSD and anxiety, not because they went through the same traumas, but because they were modeled the triggers. And in that way, every single one of us inherits the traumas of our parents, but only always. And so there really is a question, who is going to stand in the middle of that trauma train track and, hold up the hand and go, all right, this is going to stop with me right here. So that the guy that you were talking about, the client, it would be interesting to ask him the question of, and this is Byron Katie kind of work, where what would be the benefit to you of forgiving your dad, or to flip that on its head, what will it cost you if you don't forgive your dad, is a really interesting line of inquiry with that particular client. I would throw out there. So what kind of dad are you becoming, and where, because I know our kids are, man, to me, they're my greatest teachers, right? So what have you noticed that you've shifted, that you've changed, or what have you, even better question, what have you noticed, dang, no, I did this exactly like my dad, also, because I've seen that in my own, we call it the stepfather voice that sometimes sneaks up in a particular part of me. Maybe I haven't processed completely, Speak to that.
So I see my dad all the time when I'm
Oh.
disciplining my kids. So I'll say something and I'll say, that wasn't my words at all. That was my dad's words.
Isn't
Right?
that crazy?
It's amazing.
You
It's
literally, their voice comes out of your mouth. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I've always said, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be a father like my dad until I started doing this work. And I started to see the sacrifices that he made for his children. He sacrificed everything. He sacrificed everything. When we all left the house, he was so tired that he stopped working for 5 years. I had to help him get back into the workforce. And so that by doing this work, that changed my perspective of saying, I'm never going to be a parent. I'm never going to be a dad like my dad. What I've been able to do is I've been able to take the really good things that he taught us, and he was, and I've been able to see the bad things, right, through doing that letter and analyzing it. And so as much as I wanted to say, okay, I'm not going to be like my dad, I ended up being just like my dad, right? I don't hit my kids. And I'll tell you, there's a big difference in the way I parent my first kid and my second kid. And because they're just very different. But what I have tried to implement, and this is what my dad had taught me, is that I kind of had suppressed for a long time, that it's about presence, about being present and not buying presence. Right. And so that's kind of the framework that I use with my kids, is be present, not presence. Right. And so when I get very into my work and very busy. And so
what I heard you say, you're saying give your time, not necessarily
time,
things.
not your money.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have to provide, right? I'm not saying that if you need to make this money to not do that so you can sit and play, cars with your kids. But when you have the time, make the time for your kids. My dad would come home exhausted from work, and he would still sit with us and make sure that he knew what was going on in our lives, or he would try to make sure what was going on in our lives. We were teenagers, so we were like, nothing, but he showed us his presence, and he showed us, and this is something that I forgot until I did this letter. And so that part of it I'm taking with me. There's other parts that he showed us that, his quick trigger, I don't do. I've learned to have a little bit more patience with my kids, right? He was very militant. My dad was very militant in the morning. Like, all right, let's go. And what I realized, I'm like, no. I want my kids to wake up. I'll wake them up 10 minutes earlier so they have an easier wake up, and they can kind of roll into the day with a little bit more positive and energy than being told, let's go, come on, shower, lunch, or shower, breakfast, let's go. And so that's something that I didn't take from my dad that I've changed. And really, at the end of the day, to wake your kids up 10 minutes early, they're not going to miss out on the sleep, but it's going to allow them to not feel rushed in the morning and not have that kind of, rushy energy. And so I guess to conclude, what I try to do is I try to be there for my kids. Ask them instead of tell. Well, my 11, again, I parent differently. My 11-year-old, who's very mature for his age, I don't tell him to do anything anymore. I ask him, I ask him his opinion and what he thinks about certain situations instead of reprimanding and scolding. My 5-year-old's a really good kid, so I don't really, I just have to say his name, and he's like, okay, sorry. And so those are things that, again, things that I've learned through the years, through other mentors that have stuck with me. And so I would say that I take the good things that my dad taught me, I let go of the bad things, and I take the good things that I've learned from mentors over the years.
Yeah, I heard you basically mention two key areas, and this is maybe a little bit of a shameless plug for coaching, but I know that both you and I incorporate mindfulness, and in my opinion, any coach that's worth the salt is going to incorporate a component of mindfulness in what he's helping. And so, what I heard was presence, patience, and I heard curiosity also, but which I think mindfulness and curiosity are freaking superpowers. And if you it's kind of like anything. If you want to be good at surfing, if you want to be good at playing guitar, you got to practice. So I really want to encourage those that are listening that it's like, oh, he says, well, I'm more patient. How do I do that would be a question a lot of men, have, especially men that have kind of anger issues. So I would say, go talk to Matthew about how to practice mindfulness, or just go Google the research on it and get yourself, on a mat, get yourself into a practice of some sort. Absolutely. But you mentioned, things that were kind of a natural curiosity. You ask your children, like you give them kind of choices. It's the way that it's kind of like this is the way the universe creates, is through curiosity. And that seems to be like, I don't know if we can talk about that enough, because I don't remember my stepfather being curious. Like he wasn't, like it was his way or the highway, or you got, there was, mental, emotional, physical, abuse, in some particular way. But to show up as a dad being curious, what a phenomenal trait. How do you cultivate curiosity? What would be your wisdom in that area?
I believe the same thing you do, Scott, that our kids are our greatest teachers. And they have a very different worldview than we have. And so sometimes I just want to know where he's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you did this because there's two things, right? For in our house, when you break the rules and you know what the rules are, is one thing. When you break or you do something bad and there was never a rule put in place, there was never a boundary set, right? So for both of those, I ask, what was the motivation behind doing this? And my son at this point, he's 11, but because of this line of questioning, this curiosity, he's gotten to a point where he's like, I was just trying to piss my brother off, And when he does that, the punishment is very minimal, right? Sit in your room for 5 minutes and think about it, When he lies about it, or he gives you this line of bullshit, I'm like, okay, sit in your room for an hour and I'll come back and we'll talk about it again. But for me, I really genuinely want to know his viewpoint. Like, what are you thinking? And sometimes like, oh, I was just bored. And now I'm like, oh, so the problem isn't your behavior. The problem is you're bored. I think being bored is a great thing for a kid, especially in today's day and age where everyone's like, oh, phone, like screen. And so I encourage.
What's the old adage that bored people are boring? I've thrown that one at my kids.
Yeah. Only boring people get bored, right? And so what we've done is when he comes up with bored is we've created a list of things that you can do. So he has a list of 25 things to do when he's bored. And so and sometimes we can see him. My wife and I would be like, Dante, you look like you're bored. No. Oh. I'm like, go check your list, And as soon as he can get in that list, he's like, oh yeah, I have so many things I can do. And so I think to go back to the curiosity part, is I really do believe them to be our greatest teachers. And there's a lot of times for me asking his point of view, I learned something about myself as well as him.
Right on. So we've kind of touched on some of these different kind of core themes that we see with men, the hunger for approval. Why do men crave their father's blessing even decades later? We mentioned a little bit, but sometimes there's an overcompensation, and sometimes there's a collapse, like the different ways that men try to outrun their father wound, was kind of an aspect of this session. And then the becoming like him. You mentioned some of that also, which was, what about the man who swore he wouldn't, but then, he ended up noticing it became just like it. And I said the stepfather voice, and you said, I see my dad in all these aspects as well. What else are you seeing with men? Or do you want to speak to any of these three in a way that we haven't already? What else are you seeing that men are really struggling with in coaching sessions today?
In terms of their fathers?
Yeah.
So when you said, trying to get away from the father wound, this is something you see all the time. Mm-hmm. You hear people all the time say, I won't be like my dad. My dad was abusive. And then I think we'll come back to that, but I think that we look for our father's approval because it's in our DNA. For the whole history of humanity, men have been initiated by other men. And we don't have that anymore. And within the initiation, you would have to go through an ordeal, right? You have the separation, ordeal, integration, right? The 3 steps of the initiation. So during the ordeal, you're put up with some life-threatening activities that you have to accomplish. And when you finish that, the group of elder men give you their approval. And so you have that. So this is something that's within our DNA that we don't
So we're
have.
talking about the masculine container, to where a man can test his mettle against something, and that's what we've been missing, like our rites of passage. We've been missing
Exactly.
that as men, and so that's what I know that you incorporate, and I do also incorporate components of that in our coaching,
For
because
sure.
I find it fascinating that men, when challenged by another man, they rise like almost across the border. It's really quite interesting. I think it's always interesting to see how men are actually surprised at that call inside, and the call of the lion or the mountain or whatever you want to call it. Like, yeah, I want to be that. I want to own my life. Kind of thing. There is an energy there.
And I think it comes with, a problem that I think people are struggling with is that we want to be validated.
Mhm.
And I think historically, we were validated by completing our initiations and through our mentorship. Like the initiation was the beginning, and then it went through mentorship, right, with uncles or other elders of the community. And those mentors would give us the validation. Without that now, men are looking for their wives to give them validation. And this is not what has
Or they
been
want them to be their therapist. Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
have you read the book Wild at Heart by John
Yeah.
Elliott?
Yeah. Great
So
book.
he says, you need an adventure.
Yeah.
The woman is not the adventure. You can invite her to come along, but you need your own adventure. And that adventure is what's missing, right? And within that adventure, normally there's a validation from an older male or another male, right?
Right.
Whether it's yourself or someone else.
Right.
And we've dropped the adventure and we've turned our women into our adventure.
Yeah.
And that I think is due.
And men wonder why they have such craving in these aspects, because there's a core part of them that's not getting fulfilled by testing themselves against, it. Like there was an article about lifting iron. It was like, it's going to be the same every day, like there's a wall there to meet, and where you're at with that. I love that. My son, I got to interject there. My son, both of my kids, one of the things that we were really adamant about was we wanted them to be exposed to different cultures, and so we've taken them on different trips, and things during their childhood. My son, who just turned 18, he's with 2 really great guy friends. Both of them are actually older than him, and I think they're camping actually tonight in Zion State Park. Like they did this whole cross country thing in the Hummer, where they're camping and hiking and testing their mettle against nature at 18. So I love that you spoke that, because I was like, yeah, that's what my son's doing right now. That's great. So in my practice and what we do with the Authentic Masculinity Project, we actually have a program called the Rite of Passage. And in that program, we're going through the 4 pillars of understanding your past, your path, having a practice of presence, which we've mentioned already. I'm really, really big as a somatic processing trauma therapist on the process, which often is somatic, process of the body. And then the 4th one is strategy, which there's a lot of straight line leadership, strategic intervention, transformation coaching. There's a lot of different thought processes of how men can approach decision, and get places. Speak a little bit to how you approach rite of passage with your coaching clients.
Ooh, that's a great question.
I saw the picture where you're all sitting around the campfire, and I truly believe that. There's a transmission that actually occurs when you get men together, in a particular place, like what we were just talking about with the adventure.
For sure. And with our men's group, we always have a fire. It's symbolic. And it's really, I think it's really important because it helps us remember who we were and who we are today. And we're in a very strange place in terms of the evolution of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we hold these spaces so that men can be vulnerable with other men, and they can get through and work through some of their biggest challenges with us so that they can show up better for their family. right? John Wineland said in his book, From the Core, he says, for men to show up in their 100% in their relationship with their missus, with their and their kids, they have to have three things. One is time alone, where you're not doing anything. You're not even, he says, not even meditating. I'd like to meditate alone. But the second one is time in nature.
Mm-hmm.
That's again, our kids, nature, two of the biggest, and death, three of the biggest teachers in our lives, right? So you have time alone, time in nature, and time in depth with other men.
Mm-hmm.
So this, again, I think I said this in the last podcast, it's not about getting a beer and watching the game. It's about going deep into who you really are and what trauma you need to work through.
So it sounds like you're suggesting that what men are struggling with is really being a little too shallow and only operating on a surface level as well. And so for the man that just heard that word, that naughty word, what did you said the V word, vulnerability, but again, this is what we're talking about with the hood and being able to look at the engine. You got to get past that stigma of, hey, I got to talk about what's actually going on inside. And we see this over and over and over again with men who, like you said, make women their world, and they expect all of this from this one particular partner, but yet there needs to be more men connecting in group in some way. Transmission, talk about that a little bit. I'm setting that up from the aspect that if we put 15 grandfather clocks that are all ticking at different times in the same room, within a short period of time, they're all going to be clicking the same way. Or you put 10 women in the same residence, their menses are going to line up, things like that. Talk about men getting together in a group and what that does in just the sense of kind of a synergy and an energy and what gets normalized.
I think their story gets normalized. They realize that we're not very different. Like, we all have very similar problems and very similar challenges that we have to work through. Yeah. And so, your analogy about opening the hood. So there are certain groups where men with free groups, when men pay for the groups, they're ready to go. But with free groups, men might need to go to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meetings before they're really ready to kind of crack open the hood and see what's under there and let other people see what's under there. And I think what the thing is that they see is they're hearing other people who are being vulnerable and who are sharing their emotions and their story, and they're thinking, man, mine's not that bad, or mine's really similar. We have very similar kind of experiences. And when they can have that sensation and feel kind of the power in numbers, then they can kind of open the hood a little bit.
I'm reminded of Counseling Theories 101, where Dr. Parquet, shout out, taught us from a textbook. There was this big, huge graph. And in the graph, it showed like the major way that people are healed in therapeutic situations. It said it didn't matter what type of therapy. It said the number one way was that the people felt understood, right? And so that's exactly what you're kind of speaking of. But I was also, while you were speaking, I was thinking of like the seed that you got to go soak, in whatever that is. You got to soak it in that, so that it softens, so that it can actually, sprout and grow in some particular way. So you're saying that men need to find a group of some sort, and they need to soak a little bit so that they can crack open in all the right ways and grow.
That's exactly it. That's exactly a great analogy.
Beautiful, beautiful. So what would you say to your 8-year-old self right now?
Oof. What comes up for me again is the Iron John book, right, by Robert Bly, because he had mentioned that when the lone hunter brought the wild man back to the castle and they put him in the cage, it was an 8-year-old that lost the golden ball, and it fell into the cage of the wild man. And I remember, in that book, him saying that normally you ask the wild man for the ball back and he says, I'll give you the ball back, just bring me the key, and you just run away, right? And you might not come back until you're 20 years old. And I think that's what happened to me, is that I sensed that there was some problems in my family, in my parents' relationship, in their marriage, when I was probably 8. And I think what I would do is I would tell my 8-year-old self to be compassionate to both of them and remember that mom has the key under her pillow.
Wow. And I hear that, and I also hear even at this age, the pressure that we put on our childhood self, like you were 8, like, yeah. Okay.
It was hard when my parents started fighting probably when I was about 8.
Mm-hmm.
And it took them 3 years of fighting to figure out that it wasn't going to work. And so they were of the type that they would never want to fight in front of us. So they would wait till we went to sleep and then all out, which is something that I don't do. If my wife and I have a discussion, we have rules of engagement. So it rarely turns into yelling. And we'll do it if our kids are there or not. Because they
So speak to that just a little bit from this angle, that like at 8 years old, like between 2 and 7, 2 and 8, like there's a certain brain activity theta that what I find is that what you experienced during that time period kind of gets kind of programmed in your nervous system. So in order for you to go from that to I don't do that, right, in a certain way, is it in resistance, or was there a process that melted you into that, right, in a certain way? Is it in resistance, or was there a process that melted you into that? I think this is a very kind of core transition, because that's what your body was used to, your nervous system was used to during that time period. So how did you make that transition? And this is what we're talking about when we talk about somatic process, that a lot of men need to understand how to make that shift inside their bodies and their minds and their nervous systems.
Brilliant question. First, it was an intellectual thing, right? I remembered laying we had bunk beds. I remember laying in the top bunk and not being able to fall asleep because my parents were yelling at each other.
So it's like our core themes, becoming like him. I'm not going to become like him. It was an intellectual resistance. Okay.
It started as an intellectual resistance. Yeah. Intellectual, I'm not going to do that. And then it was the process of how am I going to avoid it?
Yeah, great question.
Right? And it was, and that's where the work comes in, right? Yep. And that's when you do the work on your nervous system, because what happens is my wife, she explodes, and it gets loud, and I hold the space for her. Mostly I do my best to hold the space for her, to let her get through that. So she knows that she's emotionally safe, that she's allowed to feel all the emotions that she has, and that I'm not going to judge her, throw her to this curb just because she's being an emotional mess. So
even though she's from another country, did you basically marry your mom like most of us? Is that or no?
No. My mom and I had a very difficult relationship growing up. And
your mom didn't explode.
My mom was not my dad was much more of a yeller than my mom.
Gotcha. Okay.
My mom was much more of a crier. Mm-hmm. And I think I consciously worked on myself for years before I even met my wife. And when I met her, I'm like, okay, I could tell she brought out the best in me. Mm-hmm. She didn't take my bullshit. And so I was like, this is the person that I want to have babies with, and create a family. So yeah, it's funny because people ask me, oh, did you marry your mom? And I'm like, not really. Like, there's very few similarities between them.
I got to interrupt here, man, because it's speaking to the coaching that you did yourself and what we do. And it's speaking to a pattern that when we do the work, we radiate a different kind of energy. So one of the two things, if we're in a relationship that's long-term, it's going to open a space for her to be able to be safe enough for her to do her work. Or if we're not in a relationship, we're going to attract a different type of woman. And I see this pattern over and over and over again. It sounds like you did the work and then you attracted you did not attract your mom. But if you had not done the work, what would have happened? You would have attracted somebody like your mom.
I did. And my first couple girlfriends were my mom.
There it is.
Right?
Okay, that's what I was looking for.
They were my mom, but they were exactly like my mom.
Right.
Like a little bit, manic depressive, and just like the ups and downs and the crying. And I remember I had this girlfriend who we were in New York on New Year's going from 1999 to 2000. So, the center of the world. And she just cried the whole night. She couldn't explain why. And she's like, please pull me out of this dark place. And she did this often.
Mm-hmm.
That was exactly like my mom. And my next girlfriend after that, very similar to my mom as well. And when we broke up, I said, no more. I was like, I am not going to date again until I am ready, until I have done this work, right? Because it's, like I said, first it's intellectual. Then you have to do the somatic work, right? Because yes, it can work in your mind all you want, but if it still brings up emotions that you can't separate from or you can't process, then it's not going to serve you. And so I did all this work, and after doing, and we're talking about a period of almost 5 years of being single, of just dating, and just testing out the waters. Literally nothing longer than 3 months. And then I met my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember saying, I'm like, well, you're not really my type, and she wasn't my type. She wasn't my mom. And I attribute that to the work that I did, right? Starting with the intellectual work of being like, oh my God, I'm dating people that are just like my mom. And then deciding, is that a good thing or a bad thing? What am I looking for? What does go with who I am and my authentic self?
I want to back up and explain a little bit of what you're just talking about to our audience, from the aspect that we are literally physically drawn to what I consider to be individuals that will help us heal our generational childhood, past romantic relationship wounding or traumas. In that trauma bonding or complementary wounds were drawn. And so in the example you've given, you were drawn to different women that were like your mom until you did the work. And so this is the push for men to understand what somatic, even because you use the word, but I don't think we've explained that in anything that we've done here yet, that it's shifting the way your neural system is holding your reality. And there are modalities and methods that a man can be guided to where the way their body is holding or the way their nervous system is holding their reality, they can process some of those deep stories that we've already been mentioning, these different patterns, especially in the father wound, like the hunger for approval, overcompensation, or collapse, or I'm not going to become like him, like these different themes that are pretty common with the father wound. Speak to the importance of men doing that process, because to me that shifts everything. It shifts the way that you feel in your body, and it gives you more room from what was dense to where you were reacting to things, and now you can respond with clarity and wisdom, quite honestly, because you're not holding everything together in such a way because of what you were trained with as a child. And I think this is the ultimate kind of affliction that modern man is kind of going with, is that we have to unwind these childhood generational patterns so that we can reach what I call our authentic self. Some people call our soul, and what it actually came here to do as well. So how do you approach the somatic unwinding in what you do with coaching?
First, again, I think you nailed it, right? What you said is, by doing this, you're allowed to respond instead of react.
Right.
And the important thing to remember is that we are not our reactions. They happen to us based on our triggers, based on our generational trauma, based on our childhood wounds. And so we have to separate ourselves from that. We have to recognize that it's coming up, and we have to separate and create space, because when you can create this space between that trigger and your response, that's when you start to have this emotional regulation, this emotional intelligence.
So you incorporate a part of how you move through the somatic with your clients, right?
Of course. Yeah. We because you're our mind, we have the monkey mind, right? But our body is the one that really gives us the deepest information. Our body is, it's within our DNA. If you want to, like Jung's term, the collective unconscious. For me, what the collective unconscious means is that every experience that humanity has ever had, we hold in our DNA.
Right.
And so, and it's unconscious, right? So what you want to do is you want to bring that into the conscious. And so you want to bring your triggers into the conscious so that you can create space from them and say, that's not me. That's something that I've picked up along the way of the millions of years of humanity.
But for men that have difficulty raising the hood, that has to be in a place of safety, which is why you want to work with basically a somatic coach. So like that's the part that I really wanted to make, that point, that if men have not heard about somatic process, my God, get curious about it and contact Matthew, contact myself in some way to process the felt sense of what you may have been holding, what may have been held for generations in your lineage, right? That you can melt those defense mechanisms and regain that energy to apply to these things that you actually came here to do.
Exactly. And I love the fact that you say that men have to feel in a safe place to open that hood, right? And so that's the beginning. The beginning is to create from our side, right?
Because we won't open the hood if we don't feel safe. You're like, that sounds like pansy stuff to me. I'm not going to talk about my feelings, but anything not discussed is never addressed. And I think that logistically, what I would want men to hear is, man, you're leaving energy on the table. Like there's energy down there that you got stuff wrapped up and twisted in a defense mechanism that's closing you off, that if you can access it, like that's stuck energy. You know what we call stuck energy? We call that a battery you haven't accessed yet, right? And so if you're like wondering why you haven't accomplished what you really truly feel that you came here in this life to do, that's a whole dopamine conversation too. But there's so much energy that's lying on the table right there. Go get it. Go work with somebody that can show you how to unwind the somatic nervous system process of how you've been holding, what was handed to you that you didn't, in your childhood, right?
Exactly.
So you have some events coming up?
We do. I have we're on the 23rd of this month at, I believe, 3 p.m. Eastern. We have a workshop called Rescue Your Relationship.
Nice.
Marriage Maintenance 101.
Nice.
So that one is on Zoom. I can share the link to that maybe in the bio or whatever, in the comments section. And then we have a men's retreat, December 1st to December 6th.
Oh, nice.
In Playa Grande, Costa Rica. Called Indra Inn.
Okay, so we'll make sure there's a link that can give people information to everything about that and the cost and how that works. I just want to kind of shout out, you do have a hotel yourself called Indra Inn. Indra Inn there in Costa Rica, which I'm going to figure out a way to make my way down there at some point also. So Matthew, I really want to thank you for your honesty and your grounded wisdom today. And to our listeners, if this conversation stirred something in you, got you curious, that's good. That's the beginning. Go deeper. Talk to your brothers, other men. Do the work. You're not alone. So this is Reforged. Until next time, walk with men who keep you accountable with love and fire. And I'm sure we're going to have you back at some point. Is there anything you'd like to wrap up about either your coaching or about anything in the world at the moment?
What you said really resonates. You're not alone. Men seem to feel like they're isolated and they don't have anywhere to look or anywhere to turn, but it's not true. All men are going through very similar things. And reach out to your brother, reach out to your friend, go below the surface, and you are not alone. I think that's a great message.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much. And I'm sure we're going to have you back. And until next time, guys, this is Reforged. Take care. Thank you for listening to Reforged. Remember to like and subscribe for more.